In this series of videos, we're going to talk about flexible budgeting. And just to get started, I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story, and it's about my friend Joe. And Joe is in charge of the maintenance crew at a ski hill. And so I was talking to Joe, and he said, this isn't exact numbers or anything, but he said, I was given a budget at the start of the year, and in my maintenance crew, of course, I've got wages of my employees. And actually, let me just put a little title on this. Maintenance crew budget. Maintenance crew budget. And so under his budget, he's got to pay employees to do the maintenance on the ski hill, and the budget was $150,000. He also has like supplies, they got to buy small tools, they got to buy supplies to fix things on the chairlifts and wherever else around the ski hill, and they're going to use around $50,000 worth of supplies, and those are all we would call Joe's variable costs or variable expenses. So he's got $200,000 worth of variable costs. In terms of fixed costs, really the only fixed cost under Joe is the amortization of their equipment. And the amortization is expected to be around $100,000. So the total costs under Joe's area for the year were $300,000. So anyway, Joe gets this budget: 150 grand in wages, 50 grand in supplies, 100 grand in amortization. Now what happened was, so this was the plan. And what happened to Joe was, in reality, it was a colder year than normal, and the ski hill was open way more days than normal. So the ski hill, they had planned to be open for, let's say, 100 days. But in reality, the ski hill was open for 120 days because it was a colder year than expected. And so a lot of his costs were higher than expected. His wages were 170. His supplies were, let's say, 65, bringing us up to 235. His amortization, they bought more equipment than they thought, so his amortization was 105, bringing him up to 340. And so at the end of the year, Joe gets evaluated on how well he performs compared to budget, and Joe blew the budget. So if I look at the variance here, I can see that the wages are 20K unfavorable, 50 versus 65, 15K unfavorable there. Overall, in terms of variable costs, he's 35K over. In terms of fixed costs, he's 5K over. So overall, he blew the budget by 40 grand. And not surprisingly, Joe's boss was pissed. Joe's boss looked at this and said, "Joe, you blew the budget. You were way over budget. Like, this isn't good, and you deserve to be punished for this." And Joe sort of looked at this and said, "Well, wait, I worked more days than was estimated when you prepared the budget." And so this is the exact problem where flexible budgeting comes in. So this is what we call a static budget. It's a budget based on a certain amount of time or a certain amount of output for our company. And it's a great planning tool. So before the year, before any of this actual stuff was known, it's a great tool just to get ready for the year and say, okay, this is how much we're planning to spend in various areas. But what it's not as great at is after the year, when you're reviewing how you did compared to budget, it's not as helpful to have a static budget. You're better off comparing to a flexible budget potentially. And so what a flexible budget says is, okay, we plan to have 100 days open this year, and these would have been our expenses at that level. And again, it's a great planning tool. But when we want to evaluate Joe, we shouldn't really evaluate him comparing to the static budget. We were open like 20% more than we thought we were going to be open. So a flexible budget system says, no, this is not a good column. This isn't particularly useful because, yeah, you blew the budget, but we were open way more. Of course, there's going to be more employees' wages if you're open that many more days. So what's better to do, I'm going to erase the whole column, is to make a new budget, a flexible budget, And that flexible budget, rather than being at 100 days as our old budget was, this flexible budget is going to be for 120 days. So we pretend we didn't ever see the actual column, and we say, okay, let's pretend I could go back in time to the beginning of the year when I was making my budget, and this time let's make our budget at 120 days, not at 100. So again, we ignore the actual column. We pretend we don't know what happened. We said, if I were to start this year over and make a new budget, and I were to budget at 120 days, what would my budget look like? Well, not surprisingly, and here's a quick way to do it. I'll make a new column in here as well called the formula column. All I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, well, wages are 150 grand for 100 days. That means the wages are $150 per day. Supplies are 50 grand for 100 days. Oops, is it $150 per day or $1,500 per day? I think is the number. I missed a zero. 50 grand for 100 days. That means our supplies are 500 per day. Now, in terms of fixed costs, I don't need to look at a daily cost. They're fixed. Doesn't matter how many days there are, that's a fixed cost. So if I were to make a budget of $1,500 per day and I knew I was going to work 120 days, let's do a little bit of math here. Calculator tool, please. So again, my wages cost me $1,500 a day. I'm going to be open for 120 days. I would estimate my wages would be $180,000. My supplies, $500 a day for 120 days. I would estimate that my supplies would cost me, I'm thinking it's 60,000. Yeah, $60,000. So my total costs I would estimate would be $240,000. My amortization, I would, if I didn't know before the year started what my amortization or how many days I was going to work, or actually if I knew it was 120 days, I would still estimate amortization would be 100,000. Again, I don't know it's 105 in reality, but if before the year, if you told me, oh, you're going to work 120 days, if amortization is really fixed, I would say, oh, I guess my amortization is going to be 100 grand. So adding those up, my estimated costs here are 340. Now let's go down the line. My variance between my actual and my flexible budget is 10,000 for wages favorable. It's 5,000 unfavorable for supplies. So overall, we're 5,000 favorable on our variable costs. My flexible budget for amortization was 100. I actually spent 105, so I'm 5,000 unfavorable there. And overall, I actually have no variance. So Joe, rather than getting penalized for this, he hit his budget bang on. He did a nice job there. And again, the wages were lower than we would have expected. The supplies were a little bit higher, and the amortization costs were a little bit higher. But his boss shouldn't be punishing Joe. Joe hit the budget bang on. The boss shouldn't be mad at Joe for blowing the budget. The reason Joe blew the budget was because they were busier than expected. So what a static budget does is it's a planning tool, and it just doesn't change, and you kind of can compare it to what your plan was. But if you're way busier than what your plan was, a lot of times the numbers go out of whack and you don't get much use out of the budget. That's where a flexible budget comes in. At the end of the year, you're going to say, okay, well, here's what we actually did in terms of busyness or in terms of volume. So why don't we make a new budget based on that volume and kind of see how we did compared to that? And it's more of an apples to apples comparison. So that's the focus of a flexible budget. We're going to work through one quick problem, an old exam question on a flexible budget, and that'll be the next video. Stay tuned.